Welcome, everyone. What a pleasure to be with all of you. Well, I just want to welcome you, Angaangaq, and I was introduced and said that we could call you Uncle if we couldn't properly pronounce your name. So I will ask you to properly pronounce your name so we can all hear its full resonance. And I will just share a little bit of an introduction, which is we are in the presence of a shaman, a healer, a storyteller, an Eskimo, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Kalaallit. Is that you're gonna help us with how to say the resonance of your land in a good way, I hope. Elder, whose family belongs to the traditional healers of the far north in Greenland. His name means the man who looks like his uncle. His teachings are deeply rooted in the wisdom of the oral healing traditions of his people. And I just want to take a moment to honor that a lot of us, we were planning to convene in November. And I want to really honor Anya, who has been behind the scenes. A lot of times people behind the scenes don't get to be honored for all the work that it takes to bring us all together. And so I just want to take a moment for her level of coordination and commitment to help us all be here together. And this is an opportunity to come together. And I know I asked if there are any questions that are off limits. And Uncle said, whatever questions we have is what will help guide our conversation. And I wanted to start off with one inquiry, and then I'm going to hand it over. And it's this inquiry of how to look at and how to be with the world events of today as storytellers, not in terms of the facts and information. And how do we look at this as I was driving towards coming to be with you today, really, really kind of alive in this idea that, this story structure of the hero's journey has been really, really ingrained in the Western culture a lot. And there's some beautiful parts of the story, but also there's this part of the story that requires us to go out. And in order for us to go through an initiatory experience, we have to go find the bad guy. We've got to find the monster and we've got to kill it. And then we get to come home and bring our gifts forth. And I was really thinking about what is the other side of that? What is the initiation of the feminine, and how that is the feminine heroine's journey, and about going inward, and how do we find that, which is within that needs to be healed or transformed, and then come back out to give the gifts. And just curious to hear, and I know that you were starting to speak about that before, and then everyone came, so I wanted to continue that conversation with all of us now. So thank you for being with us today.
I'm so happy to be amongst you there. My name is Angaangaq, and it means the man who looks like his uncle. I was actually named after my father's older brother, whose name is Kuyagi, which means the beloved one. But he was named after his uncle Angaangaq, was named after his uncle Kuyagi. So I go a long ways back. And it's really interesting, some few years ago, three years ago, I think, my local government called me up and said, Uncle, you better come home. I said, okay, what's happening? UNESCO has arrived. So, UNESCO from the United Nations. My government had wanted to create sacred land on my grandmother's land because they had been there for a long time. And then, so they asked the national government of Greenland to make it sacred land. And then national government asked UNESCO to come and make it heritage land. And my great aunt, who died 4 years ago, just 2 weeks short of being 94 years old, had instructed me and everyone else of the elders that there should be no digging on the sacred land of her aunts, my grandmother. So I came to this circle with all the scientists and all the archaeologists and stuff like that. And then they were told that there's no digging to be done. But unbeknownst to me, they had taken some samples from the earth to see how long people have lived there. And it turned out to be about 6,000 years. So I come from a really, really old land, an old village. And it's really interesting that UNESCO made it heritage land, never to be developed, to be left as it is, but used as an elders gathering place, which I do now. So that's where I'm from in Greenland. So when you see me downtown Angaangaq in Greenland, I hope you will stop me and invite me for a cup of coffee. And if you come, you will have to carry at least 1 kilo of fresh coffee. It had to be at least 1 kilo. Well, then you can have the world. Because coffee doesn't grow in Greenland. I don't know if you know that. So therefore, you have to bring some 1 kilo coffee. So that's my requirement. Besides that, I grew up in an old village where the old house was a bit more than 500 years old and still there on the coast. My grandmother's village, some almost 300 kilometers inland. But on the coast for the winter village, I grew up there, 3 houses. And by the time I left it in 1959, there were 17 people in that village. So in a traditional form, grandmothers would take care of the grandchildren because mother and father had to hunt and fish. There was no Walmarts, there was no electricity, there was no running water, just a village. And now it is February. In 3 months, we will move to a teepee of sealskin. And our teepee is just 5 meters away from the river. So I grew up with the sound of that healing energy of water. So, and when I left, we moved to a huge, huge city of 300 people. Had never seen so many people in one place. It's really strange. How can people live so tightly together? And so many of them, it was difficult to understand. Our grandmother, her name is Angaangaq. She raised us to understand where we come from, who we are as Native people. And then she would tell stories. And as I grew up and became older boy, like other older boys and girls as well, I would be so tired of listening to the same stories. And some of the older ones would say, "Oh, Grandma, we heard that before." And the amazing thing about my grandmother was that she would have a beautiful, beautiful smile to all of us, and she would tell the same old story. Now I understand what she means. She says to us, listen, listen, then listen more. Only then can you tell a living story. So I listened to my grandmother, our grandmother. God help me to, my English is not very good, by the way. So my English is my 4th language. So if you don't understand me, you're going to have to stop me and ask me so I can say it differently. So my grandmother says that we had to listen. Listen, then listen more. Only then can you tell a living story. And that's the path of oral tradition. the native people of North America and South America, Pan America and Caribbean, we are old oral traditional people. So the stories are repeated over and over and over until it becomes living inside yourself. So that's pretty important for those of us who tell stories. So, and I'm so happy now that I have listened to the stories from my grandmother, our grandmother. Now, I finally just put the finishing touch on my book, where I tell the stories from our grandmother. And this great one willing, I'll be able to publish it soon. And my idea of hope is that people will be able to take it into the heart and not just read it once like modern people do. And I say that with a smile in my heart, because the book readers tend to read their book once and put it back on the shelf. The traditional people will listen to the same story hundreds and hundreds of times until they remember all of it. So that's the beauty of storytelling, that it didn't come into you yesterday. It came into you through your life of listening until you can tell a living story. So that's how it is. And the way I grew up, our grandmother was a doctor. The last in West Greenland, the last medicine woman, a real true medicine woman who was a doctor. So people would come in from their villages to see the doctor. They will come with gifts to my grandmother, to our grandmother. Please correct me again. Our grandmother. And then she would treat them. And in late summer, we would be sent out on the fields and collect small roots, no bigger than your little finger. It's all black on the skin, but when you cleaned it, it would become a white meat. What we call hososengwa, the beautiful root. And she would dry it, and she would crush it, and put it in the seal fat. And that was her main medicine to people. So, and people would take it and then in their gratitude, and then they would go home. So our grandmother was a true healer. And our mother was a student of our grandmother for 47 years. And before she died, she told us, I know so much, but I know so little when I listen to your grandmother. So I've always wondered, how can anybody be a student for 47 years? Well, then I realized that if you graduate, then you lose that interest, and that energy will go away from you. Why? Because there's so much to learn every single day. So much to learn. So this is where I come from. Now, 2 days ago, I came back from Dubai. I came down there on the invitation by the World Expo, and that was the 75th country I was invited to work in. So I have traveled quite a bit in my life. And I think of it, I know that it comes with responsibility. You don't get invited to 75 countries without the responsibility. Though I'm still attempting to understand what is the responsibility I carry to be invited to so many places on earth. Then I realized I was flying home that my responsibility is to be in a good way, to wherever I go, to whomever I meet, to whomever I sit down with, whoever is listening to me, that I had to be in a good way. If I'm not, then would be because I feel better than anyone else. No, I will never be better than anyone else. I want to carry myself in a good way. In our traditions, they say that one day you and I, we should be walking tall and powerful as we are meant to be. And it's so interesting. When the white man came, the Danish people came to Greenland to develop our country in the 50s, when I was a boy. It was so interesting how different they were. They were so different at even at times they would be laughing at the elders, which we had never seen before. Because my father was speaking Danish, so all these Danes would come to our little house, and my mother would be busy in making coffee and whatever, cakes and cookies or whatever. And then my father would be talking to these men who had come to build hospitals, schools, roads, and electrical facilities, and harbors, and then I remember one day they were all sitting in our little house, and all these men asking questions to our beloved grandmother. And then they ask her, how do you have fire on this cold land? You have no trees. And my grandmother started to tell him that before there were trees on our land. But then the big ice came and covered the land. And when she retreated, there was no more trees, except on the ground, there would be 100 meters, 300 feet long stem curling around the earth. It was too cold for the tree to stand up. And then she says, and when the world needs it most, the trees will stand again. And then I remember these people laughing at my grandmother. I had never seen it before in my life. People laughing at an elder. I can see my grandmother shrieking in, I don't know, in an energy I'd never seen before. Didn't know what to do with herself. And lo and behold, many, many years later, scientists proved that Greenland, where I come from, was a land of forest. But it comes through the stories. If you listen to them, you understand that there were times when there were trees, and we can see that now. So interesting how important stories are. And having my grandmother be proven to be right by the scientists was pretty exciting for me. So I can still hear this laughter. I can still see the faces of these men laughing at my grandmother and how she shrieked in her little being, so uncomfortable. But at the end, her stories now live all over the world in 75 countries. So, what are the stories? There are many creation stories, just like anywhere else on Earth. Ours talks about the creation of the sun and the moon. It's very interesting. We have longhouses. Longhouses are ceremonial homes where in the winter, it's really exciting time because there's no sun. Sun doesn't get up. So the nights are long. And in that longhouse, there are ceremonies. And the most fascinating ceremony of the winter is that where all the lights are turned off. It's pitch black in there. People come in there with a carcass of sealskin or caribou skin, and the skin boots, the skin pants, but then the drums come, and they play the drums. So, and when you beat the drum, your body and your spirit start to move, and dances start to happen. And as you move around and you dance, it becomes too hot very quickly because there are many of us in this longhouse. And of course, then the outer underarm had to be taken off, and then the skin pants had to be taken off, and boots had taken off, and long before you realize it, it's all naked, and they're all dancing in ecstasy. And of course, when you dance, you would touch somebody. And when that happens, things happen to you inside. You can't see who you touch, and you attempt to understand who was it I touched. And but you can't. But as dances go on and more touches are happening, intimacies will occur. And that's part of the ceremony. But then that day, on what you know as the shortest day of the year, the equinox of 21st of December, at the shortest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. And as you dance and you touch, things happen inside you. You're not just a normal human being in the pitch blackness of the surroundings, and you touch somebody, you can feel there's some physical reaction on you, and that will lead to intimacy. And when that happened, and the light came back, and people found their clothes and put them on, and there was this young lady who realized that she had been intimate with her brother. So in her shame and in her sadness, In her shock, she ran out of the longhouse. In the meantime, brother wanted to apologize to his sister and just start to run after her. And the young woman ran and ran and ran. She came to a ledge of the mountain and she just jumped off. And she became the sun. Her brother runs after her and came to the same ledge, and he can see her sister flying off to the sky. So he too jumped, but he was not as strong as his sister. So he became the moon. And it's really interesting that the sun in our tradition is the life-giving source of all, because he's a female. And the moon is just like men in your world. They come and go. One day they will appear, the other day they will be gone. So that's why we have the sun as a female, the life-giving source for all of us, and the moon who comes and goes. But on the last moon down in Dubai, I was invited to a private home where they've been together 40 years. Every Friday night they get together and just talk and get to know each other better. And so they asked me to chant. I didn't bring my drums, so I just had to chant, and the moon had just come up. So I told him the story about the moon. Because men like me have always had that question, what is that moon doing for us? What does he do? And the moon had always wanted to tell the man what it is that he does for him. But he never really had the courage, because man is always so strong, so determined. What the heck does he do for us? So one day the moon took the courage. So he said to the man, you know, because of me, the lakes and the rivers and the ocean lives. So the man was very surprised and said, how? Because of me, there's a high tide and low tide. So the water and the rivers and the ocean can live, and you can have food from there. And man had never thought about it like that. He was really impressed that, wow, I never thought of it. Yes, that's what the moon does. So that gave moon more courage. And then he said to the man, and you know what? Because of me, your woman has a moon time. And after the moon time, the next generation can be born. And man said, how, what do you mean? How? So the moon says, because of me, your woman has a moon time. And after the moon time, the next generation can be born. And it dawned on the man, wow, this is amazing. He never thought of it, that his woman has a moon time and that it comes literally from the moon. So that was really surprising for the man. So the moon said again, and you know what? There will be a time when it is very dark and moon doesn't come at all. You know that yourself. And the moon said to him, you know, when you have the hardest time, I will come and shine upon you. So you will have hope. And man thought of it as, yes, it is true. There are really hard times in his life, like yours and mine as well. And when that happens, we go lost in the darkness of our own world. But then the moon mysteriously will shine upon us. And upon him shining upon us, we get hopeful inside. And life becomes easier. So that's the moon. What he does for you and I is far more important than just being an incredible being whom we look at. And as he grows and becomes full, how powerful he is. And then, because you and I, we human beings, we all will feel darkness in our life. Hardship will hit us. Difficult times will hit us. Uncertain times will hit us. Then he will come and shine upon you. And every time you look at him, you realize that there's lots of hope for better times. That's the two things you and I, we cannot live without: the sun and the moon. Then, of course, there are many, many more things. And we can now feel it today because I'm upside down with the time zone of 9 hours. I woke up in the middle of the night and I turned on my TV, and that war thing of Ukraine and Russia had started. We have known for a long time that Russia will walk in again to Europe. Now it happened. And it's really interesting how the old people have seen that Russia walking into Europe again. In fact, one of them is my father-in-law. Uki is his name. Uki is a grandfather in his language. And 2 days before he died, he called me up to his bed in the hospital and said, Angaangaq, do you think God will forgive me? I was so stunned. So my own father-in-law asked me if God will forgive him. I was really surprised with this question, and I said, Uki, what do you mean? And he says, you know, I do not know how many people are killed during the Second World War, because he was a sharpshooter for Finnish army. And he has four big medals for being the best sharpshooter for the army during the Second World War. And he left Finland when my beloved wife Sinikka was 5 years old, because Russia was almost attacking Finland again. So I said, people say that God is all forgiving. I never met him, but that's what people say. That. So I said, I'm sure he has forgiven you. You are nothing to fear. I think he was happy with my answer. But then he called me again and said, Angaangaq, just know Russia will walk in again. And that was 30 years ago. And lo and behold, Russia walked into Europe. And in our traditional understanding of the world, our grandmother tells us that a big river will come. And every spring, a big river comes. Those are the lakes up in the mountains who are frozen. And when the sun returns, it starts to immediately warm up the water. And as you know, as water becoming warm, it expands. And sooner or later, the lake ice will explode and rivers will open, and with that will come down all the fish of Arctic char coming down. So at the bottom of the river, we will be on each side of the river, and you cannot hear because of this noise of the ice and water. We scream out, ho ho, and then direct each other which way we should go. But it's so interesting. Year after year, people will die in that river. They will slip on a slippery stone or a stone moving, so they lose the balance, and then the river takes them. And our beloved grandmother says, when that happened, and that goes for all of you, all of us, do not jump into the river. And the moment you do that, you too will become the food for the river. Angaangaq would tell us, no, learn to say how much you love your family, what a difference they have done in your life, what a gift they have been for you. Then thank them for all that, then wish them well wherever they're going. And then run up the hill. Because the world which is coming after that big river needs you. And for me, that event in Ukraine is like a big river coming to us, mankind, with a war which is worse than all the wars combined. And that's where my family lives, across the ocean. And I feel so sad that mankind seem not to have learned anything of the thousands and thousands of wars they have held. I wonder, why are we not learning the most basic thing, which is life itself? I know about that life was I don't know about you, but I have 4 kids. Only one I took myself out of the mother, my youngest daughter. It was a phenomena I wish every man would have experienced. When that enormous head came out of the mothers, it was so interesting. I was instructed not to panic, but it was just an instruction. It was difficult not to panic. Finally, she came out, and I took her, because I come from a traditional knowledge. I'm bare naked on my chest. So I took her into my arms and put her into my heart. That little thing, it was so incredible to feel the warmth, the wetness, the smell. Nothing more delicious one could ever imagine to have. Then I had to give her to her mom. So I gave her mother. And she was also bare-chested. And it was so incredible to witness that. Then I had to cut that thing, halasa, And I was told that it would not hurt, but it hurt on me. And I know that it was not hurting her, but in me cutting it, it hurt. But all that after that, that ceremony of a newborn, I became a father to an incredible girl. And she was on my chest. And she wasn't crying. So I almost shook her so she can cry, but I was told not to. So, but it was so incredible to hold that human being I have created and holding her in my arms. I can feel when I put my hand here, I can feel her warmth and the wetness. And then when I look at her, realizing that I have caused a new life to happen, it's an incredible feeling, which reminds me of the story of you and I. We have become so far apart that you and I, we no longer greet each other in the morning. We don't say good morning. Oh, did you have a good sleep? What did you dream? We don't do that anymore. Even in the same household, even in the same village, in the same town or city, we stop greeting each other. It is as though you and I, we have become strangers to one another. And when that happens, the old people say, you and I will begin to develop ice in our heart. Is that true that you and I, we will develop ice in our heart? When I asked my mother, our mother, before she passed on, she said, yes, we have developed ice in our heart to such a degree that we don't recognize each other's beauty, each other's significance, each other's acceptance of each other. All that happened because I was at United Nations. I was an elder for United Nations for many years and traveled the world. Yes, I got paid a lot of money traveling for United Nations, and I'm so thankful that you pay your taxes, because every time you pay your taxes, United Nations gets money. Then I can travel, and I travel first class or business class, stayed in five-star hotels, and look forward to go to a fascinating restaurant I haven't been to. So we did that over and over. My talk was climate change. I was a runner for the elders. So one day I decided to go home to tell my mother, no, I cannot do that anymore. I can't. I felt so guilty that I don't tell it to anybody. I love travel. So I look forward to the next trip. And then I came home. My father has passed on. So my mother had taken my father's seat, our father's seat. So I sat on her seat. And then that evening, the elders were gathering to meet me and me to report to them. And then I said to my mother, Mother, I'm going to quit to be a runner for the elders. And she was just looking at me. and acknowledged what I said. And she asked, why? I said, I cannot change people. People don't listen to what I say. My message was from an elder to tell them about that the big ice is melting. And it didn't work. I've been to more places than I can name to you in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, many times, Rio de Janeiro, Johannesburg, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Stockholm, name it, I've been there. And then I said, I can't do that anymore. And my mother listened to it. And then she got up from her chair. And just like you, when your mother gets up, you get up too. So I got up too. And she took my hands like that. And she's a small woman. I'm a very tall Eskimo. I'm about 10 feet tall. So I'm looking at my mother, and she looked at me, and then she said, my son, you're going to have to change the ways. And I can hear that. I said, yes. I said, you're going to have to learn to melt the ice in the heart of man. Only by melting the ice in the heart of man, man will have a chance to change and begin using his knowledge wisely. I can hear that. I can hear her voice. And then I shook her hand, and I opened my eyes. I shook her hand. She opened her eyes, and I looked at her and I said, how? And my mother, being my mother, she closed her eyes. So I closed my eyes, and we were still holding hands together. And she said, my son, you're just going to have to change the ways. You're going to have to learn to melt the ice in the heart of man. Only by melting the ice in the heart of man, man will have a chance to change and begin using his knowledge wisely. Then she shook her hand. I opened my eyes, and she looked at me with the most beautiful, serene smile. And she took her hands away from me, and she went to her kitchen. So that's the ice in our heart. Is it true that you and I, we have developed ice in our hearts? Yes, it is. How do we know? We don't even say good morning to each other. We don't ask about the family. How's your family? We don't do that. On the street of the United States, of other countries of the world, you don't meet people and say, hey, what's your name? You don't do that. It is as though I don't exist when I meet you on the street. Just walk by. It is as though other people are not in existence. That's how far apart we go, because of the ice in our heart. And it is so interesting that the big ice of Greenland is melting. You know that there's a really, really big ice, right? In Greenland. This is the biggest ice in the northern hemisphere. And climate change of today, 2022, started to happen in 1963. The young hunters noticed in January that there was water dripping out of the big ice on one of the many fingers. That finger was on the land of my grandmother. And they went there, just like everybody else, to do offering to the Great One. for a good hunt before they take their dogs sled out to the coast, 300 some kilometers. And when they came home to the village, they told people, oh, phenomena happening. The water is still dripping from the big ice. And people did not believe the young people and even claimed that they must have been drinking beer. If they can think like that, they must have been drinking beer. So, and they said, no, we haven't. So in the month of March, the elders went hunting the same place. And after a good hunt, they go to the big ice to do some offering. The big ice was 3,500 feet tall, 1,500 meters. So they did the offering and they look up, and lo and behold, in the month of March of 1963, water was coming out of the big ice. That's when they realized the phenomena happening on this earth. You and I, we know it as a climate change. And that 3,500 foot tall wall is now about 10 meters, 30 feet from 1963. So ice is melting. As the ice is melting on the ground, our ice in our heart is growing. We have become estranged of one another. And we need to reverse it. How? The old people say that you and I, we have to recognize each other again. If we don't, a big river will come and many will die. Many will barely survive. Few will have a life. That's an ancient prophecy of our people. The only land on earth where people live where there's never been war. Imagine when you come to visit me, you'll be on the land, the only land on earth where people live where there's never been war. And that land happens to be the oldest crust of earth. Oldest crust of earth. So those are the short stories I wanted to tell you, and tell you that those stories I carry come from a woman who was born in 1893 and died in 1969 as a young woman. Her oldest sister was 103 years old when she passed. Second oldest was 96, and the third was 92, and my grandmother was 89. So she died young. But those women carried those stories. And as you can see behind me, you can see some of these stories. And every story is so important. And less you and I, we connect, less stories will we remember. How? Because we don't tell stories anymore. We read the book. Mind you, I have never read a book. I have been always so weak as a person. I was afraid that I would not have the strength to carry the purity of the stories I carry. So I'm now 74 years old. I have never read a book. Mind you, I learned to speak English by reading New York Times Weekend Magazine. I read it inside out to learn to speak English. When I went to Canada 47 years ago, I couldn't speak English. And I would get the newspaper from Montreal up to Baffin Island in the Kalaallit, and I would read it. from front to back, the whole thing. I don't know if you remember, New York Times magazine was really big newspaper. I read it inside out so I could learn to speak English. So all my mistakes come from New York Times, just so you know. So what is the significance of a story? The old people say that you, inside yourself, you yourself personally, you carry the story of the world, of your world, inside you. And you have seen things others have not seen. You have felt things others have not felt. You have heard things others have not heard. You have smelled things others have not smelled. You have tasted things others have not tasted. And then you have said things others have not said. And then you have thought things others have not thought. And you have felt things in your heart others have not felt. Is that really true? That's the way it is? It sure seems to be. How every one of us are so different from each other. We see things others have not seen. We feel things others have not felt. We heard things others have not heard, and so on. And that's your story. And that's the story which needs to come out. That's the story which could melt the ice in the heart of man. So you and I, we can become connected again and truly prepare ourselves. The big river will come. And when she comes, many will die. Many will barely survive. Few will have a life. Which one do you and I want to belong to? Every one of us will be given a choice. Is that true that that's the way it's going to be? The old people say yes. That's the way it's going to be. And it's really interesting. The last one in my family we lost to the big river in the spring was my oldest cousin from my mother's family. He was with the others in the village when the big river opened up from the mountains and all the fish were coming down. And for some reason, he slipped and he fell into the water, rushing water. And everybody around him just stood there and thanked him for being part of their life. Told him what a difference he's done to their lives, what a gift he has been in their life, and then wished him well and loved him so much. And many, many hours later, many kilometers down the ocean, we found his body. It was 4 years ago. So big rivers come every year. You go through big rivers almost every day. But still, you're standing tall and powerful as you are meant to be. But because the way we are now, We forgot the most basic thing of acknowledging each other. What a beautiful being you are when I look at you, all of you. What a gift you are to me, to my little world. How I would long to know every one of you. Because the more you and I we know of one another, stronger will you and I be to carry whatever comes. Then, of course, I'm a carrier of wind drum. Oh, 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 The name is Qilaut, Qilaut. It literally means an instrument from the great sky. Imagine that I carry an instrument from the great sky. Often I wonder why I've been gifted with these things, but I have no answer for that. The only thing I know is to say thank you. And I don't even know sometimes which way to turn to say thank you. So often I just touch my heart.
At this point, a student asked about the meaning of string games in Inuit culture.
We say that it describes life itself. And as you know, depending on how you and I will look at each other, our world will change. So we quickly do that, and then a whole different world comes. Then you had to learn to catch what I saw And then out of yourself, you create a new world. And that's how we realize what an incredible difference we have to each other. At the same time, how similar we are to one another. I always find that so incredible when I hear that description. We are so different to each other, or we are so similar to one another. So that's what it does. And one can never finish the story because there's simply not enough time in one's life to tell the story. This is our belief. This is a circle. The circle, my grandmother said, the circle which has no beginning, no ending, in which we all belong. The beauty of the circle is that we cannot see each other's backs. And the strength of the circle is that we can only see each other's beauty. And it's so interesting. And my grandmother says that I grew up on the last epidemic of tuberculosis back home in Greenland, which happened all over the North, Alaska, Siberia, and North America and native world. In the 40s and 50s, tuberculosis was really bad. And back home in Greenland, we lost thousands of people. And my grandmother says that the greatest illness of mankind is not tuberculosis. The greatest illness of mankind is that you and I, we talk behind each other's backs. And I always find it so interesting that an old woman telling us that you and I, we backbite on other people. And that is the greatest illness, not tuberculosis. And today, with the corona, it's the same. Corona is not the biggest illness. It's that we put each other down behind each other's backs still. One day, I want to walk into a world where I feel equal to everyone. Not better, not less, or together as human beings. You know, Fred, I am a hunter. And I grew up because my father had tuberculosis, so he had to go to Denmark. So I grew up with my oldest uncle. Angaangaq was his name. And he got the name because he acted as though he was a cousin to everybody. So he got that name, that Islokta, the most beloved cousin of all. So he was a famous dolphin hunter because that little dolphin, the 1 meter long black and white dolphin, the Arctic dolphin, they will come in May, and May is the time of ceremony. And dolphins are really, really amazing animals, extremely beautiful and curious. And as native people, we never knock on houses. We never knock on a door. And only a stranger will knock, and you don't open the door for strangers. And you cannot knock on a stone house, and you cannot knock on a teepee, you cannot knock on an igloo. So you just open the door and say, anybody home? And then you're home. The only time we knock is when we hunt the dolphin. So my uncle would take me out on a boat, and he would knock on the side of the boat. And out of the blue ocean, schools of dolphins will show up. And it's so interesting. My uncle would tell them about, oh, my great aunt, she can hardly walk anymore. And my great uncle cannot see much anymore. And oh, we have a new family member. Just like he was talking to me, but he was talking to the animals. And this is when you become aware how incredibly advanced these animals are compared to us. They listen. And then my uncle would say, time has come for our ceremony. Then he stops his talk. And then the dolphins will go down, straight down, and they come up and they face each other and they start talking. And they talk really loud, really high-pitched tone. And talk. And they will all go down. And you can see them going away. One remains. And my uncle would take the animal, put some water in his mouth, give it to the mouth as a last drink. And then we go home. So we can have a ceremony of food. So I do that. And I do that everywhere. I hunted in Siberia, and in Alaska, in Canada, and Greenland. And I never killed one animal without talking to the animal first, except for once. A friend of mine and I, we were walking, and I see two girls, you can see boys, so they were really excited, and then we wanted to be big hunters. I jumped into the hole of the lake, the ice, and pick up a little rock because I had seen the sandpiper a few moments earlier. And I found it, and I killed it. That's the only animal I ever killed in my life without talking first. After the girls left, I felt so sad. I went and found the bird and buried her, said a little prayer for that little animal I killed without permission. So I'm an old traditional man. I'm a good hunter. I love hunting. And I love talking to the animals, because the animals are really, really incredible beings. They are all food. You don't kill them. You ask permission. And when they give it to you, you take them. That's what we call hunting. So, and that in wintertime, right now we'll be playing our string games at night. And we would try to outbid everybody. Well, you can never do that. Only when you become tired, you lose. And good laughter. I'm so glad you brought it up.
At this point, a student asked about winter ceremonies and keeping lights burning during the long winters.
Our New Year is March 21. That's our traditional New Year. That's when the sun shines first on the North Pole. We don't call her North Pole, we call her the belly button of Mother Earth. Angaangaq, the button. So when she shines first time there, March 21, that's our New Year. I'm actually going home now to celebrate New Year. I've been in North America for 2.5 years because of Corona. So I'm going to go home now. And there I will celebrate on the sacred land the New Year. The winters are long. My land it is now my land because I'm now the oldest one. We don't see the sun for about 40 days. She doesn't get over the mountains. So it's a very special time. It's a lot of time to reflect on what you and I have been doing in our life. And then, because in the summertime, everything is so busy, you and I, we don't have much time together because you had to do your work and I had to go hunting. So we have many stories to tell. So we use that winter time. Then the ceremonies, the winter ceremony on the shortest day of the year, December 21, that's when that big ceremony happens, very intense and intimate ceremony. And then of course, full moon, new moon. There's beautiful songs about them, stories about the moon. And then, of course, when a child is born, celebrations. When someone passes on, celebrations, honorings. The ceremonies are so many. So all depends on what happened that day. And then life itself, because of climate change, we can no longer build igloos in West Greenland. The snow has changed so much that it's no longer compact. So we suffer from that. So when we had to go hunting in the winter, we had to carry heavy stuff, tents and sleeping bags, which is really heavy. And luckily in Greenland, no one is allowed to hunt with snowmobiles. So hunters had to go by dog sled, which is far more sustainable and far more beautiful. So those traditions still lives. And the life itself has changed because of climate change. Where I was born on the big island of Angaangaq, way up north, that whole ocean would be frozen from Greenland to Baffin Island. There's no more ice at all. Boats are still fishing in dead of the winter. And dog sled cannot drive on the ocean. So things have really changed because of climate change. The big ice when I was born was on the average 5 kilometers. That's 15,000 feet. Now it's less than 2 kilometers thickness on the average. And now you had to walk 20 kilometers east before you hit the big ice, because it melts. And in the summer, that little river on my land, if you ever have a chance to look at Ice Wisdom, you will see my land, and there's a little river. That river in the summer carries more than 1 million liters per second from the melting ice. Just to give you an example, have you heard about something called Niagara Falls? You have? That river runs 750,000 liters per second. But the river next to the big ice on my land runs more than 1 million liters per second. And there are more than 10,000 rivers from Greenland. So the result is not going to be very pretty for many, many people on the East Coast and the West Coast of North America. And I just came from Dubai, and I was telling them that 10, 15 years, city of Dubai will be underwater. And they asked me why. Because the ice is melting. And then on top of that is Antarctica melting and North Pole melting. Yeah, and as you probably noticed, that storms are much stronger now than when you were born. Definitely when I was born, storms are much bigger now. Waves are much bigger now. And the salinity of the ocean have changed because of the melting of the ice. Animals have moved. New fish have come in our land. Over 70 species of new fish have arrived. Fish we never seen. Few years ago, one of my nephews called up and said, Uncle, look what I got. It was tuna. Now they're catching in East Greenland Atlantic tuna. And that tuna was about $1 million worth in Tokyo. So he said, oh, I'm a millionaire. No. Half of them belong to me. So we had a good laugh. But changes are really, really big. And of course, life itself changes also. But now the hunters, as they used to be when I was growing up, are no longer there. They're now fishermen. So livelihood has changed, lifestyle has changed, and and there's no end for changes coming at us because everything is changing so rapidly. Now on my land, the trees are now almost 5 meters tall. They were just bushes that tall when I went to visit in 1963. Now they almost 15 feet tall trees. That's above the Arctic Circle. So things are really changing. And the fascinating part of it is that you and I, we are the cause of changes because we did not take seriously the warnings of the traditional people. I remember in August 78 when I spoke to United Nations Committee on Environment and told them about the melting of the big ice, I got standing ovation and I flew home and all the elders come together at my mom and dad's place and I was telling them that I got standing ovation of my talk. And they said, Angaangaq is a well-spoken young Eskimo. And then my father interrupted my talk to the elders and said, did they hear you? I looked at my father and said, but they gave me standing ovation 10, 15 minutes long. Then I carried on telling. Then he stopped me again and looked at me, son, but did they hear you? Then I realized he was asking if they heard the message. Of course, I had to admit that they didn't hear the message. Nobody listened. And I have attended more United Nations meeting about climate change more than probably any native person, but they didn't listen either. So now we had to pay for it. I'm part of a television show of Germany. They flew me down to Florida, and in Miami Beach, they spent $800 million just to pump out the salt water every full moon. That's $800 million just to pump out the salt water from the streets. But there's no way of saving those islands or Miami Beach, Miami, the big city of Miami. I was asked by the Seminoles to come down and do a ceremony. They found an ancient village, the high-rise builders, and they had to put walls around that old ancient village because the water was eating it. So Miami is not very good now. Up in Georgia and New York State and Boston are just going to be underwater in your life. In about 10, 15 years, Boston airport will be closed. Why? Ocean is rising. One day I spent 6 hours at the airport waiting for the water to come out. So it goes on like that, but we're going to have to learn to listen better to each other. Not every one of us can be expert, but everyone could know something of importance. That's what storytelling tells us. Not everybody can be expert, but we can all contribute something important for the world we live in.
At this point, a student asked about the prophecy of the river and how to prepare for this time.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked a question. That every one of us, I was told, know so much. But often, most of us do not comprehend what it is that we know. And I often think about that. It's my father who told us that you and I, we know so much, but comprehend so little of what we know. So what we know already, we don't do, because we don't quite comprehend the significance of what we know. So when it comes to the big river, it really is amazing that the not just in terms of climate change, the severity of the impact we're feeling around the globe, but we still don't agree on it. It all depends on the politics we were born into or follow. So what I would say today is never follow somebody. It was my mother who told me that. Never follow somebody, because I was telling her that I have met many people in the world, and they have many followers. And she said, never follow somebody. I'm looking at her and said, tell me, when you follow somebody, all you see is their back. And the one you follow, sooner or later will fall. And you will be looking at something you do know nothing of. I looked at her and said, what? Your future. So your future depends on what you comprehend of your knowledge. My future depends on what I can comprehend in my little mind, because there's so much knowledge in the world, but we haven't learned to use it properly. And imagine that we still send our children to school to learn read and write and count, but we never teach them how to live, how to make a living. This is 2022. We still send them to school to learn to read and write and count, but nothing about how they should be in the world they're growing up to. So we have so much to understand of what we know. So when I listen to the old people, I realize that they have so much more wisdom than I can ever comprehend. And I am a privileged man, extremely privileged. I had to say, oh, to the Great One for the gift he has given me. But I cannot do that without saying thank you to my ancestors. And they have lived in peace with one another for 6,000 years without ever having a war. That, for me, speaks a lot. So what should I take away from here? I had to touch my heart and feel her presence for me. And then lift my hand up to the Great One and thank him that he allowed me to live through all this stuff I had to go through to be where I am today. I have never gone anywhere on earth without being invited, because I was told by my father, our father, that we should not go. So, and I just got invitation from a 76 country to go to in Saudi Arabia. And I have done that honoring that ancient teaching, never go anywhere without being invited. Did I do that for fun? Not really, because I wanted to be as I was raised. Yes, of course, I'm influenced by a million things, because I have hugged and sniffed at people. I don't know how many millions and millions and millions in my world, on this amazing globe I live on. I've done that. I met the most amazing people. Right now, on the war in Russia, I had the privilege of working with Gorbachev. Now I'm an invited guest of Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela and all the leaders of the world I have met throughout the world. I am a very privileged, and I had to really say thank you. And as long as you and I will say thank you, all would be well. That's an ancient story. My father says he's not a singer like Sting. You know Sting, the singer. So I was in Rio de Janeiro with my beloved wife, and I went down to have a swim in the morning before breakfast, and somebody jumped next to my head. So he said, "Oh, can I join you?" He said, Of course, of course." I had no idea who he is, and then he said, "Hey, would you like some breakfast?" So we got up, and he introduced himself, and his name was Sting. I never knew who Sting was. So I sat down for breakfast with him, and then I can wave at my wife, and then it's an incredible world to live in. And then I remember then the most important thing my father said, as he goes hunting, catching his game, bring it home, give it to his woman, and then the grandmother invite for the feast. And because we eat so much, we say, "Oh," you know how it is. And then, so my father in his writing asked the great one, "What should we do?" And the great one answered back and said, "As long as you say thank you, all will be well." So I had to learn to say thank you for your presence into my world, and all of you, and realize that I have not lived my life in vain, but I've been able to touch upon millions of people's hearts. And when I sniff at them, because you know the Eskimo kiss? In Hollywood, they rub noses. It's a little country in the United States, very, very small, that Hollywood. I've been there. But we sniff at each other on the chin. We sniff at each other because we want to know what kind of emotions you are in now that we met. Just like your animals do, the cats and dogs. They sniff at each other. Because we live with the animals, we do the same as the animals do. And now scientists have proven that every emotions you have, you smell changes. Every emotion every one of you has, the smell changes. I'm sorry to holding everybody back. Leah, thank you so much for inviting me along. And I pray that I have not wasted anybody's time.
Thank you so much for your stories and for your generosity and for bringing us the resonance of your land and the wisdom teachings. It's a particularly beautiful day and time to be able to receive them. And how before I know that you have something that you're building. Do you want to tell us about that so that we know how to support and bring awareness to your work?
I'm one of those people who did Anya have a chance to tell you that I carry the title of a shaman?
I think so.
I carry the title of a shaman, which is the one who helps assist and guide people to the path they need to walk on. That's the shaman's work. And I was asked by my parents on August the 8th, 1969, to bring back ancient tradition, ancient prophecy of the fire returning to the land. With the only fire we had is with shield fat. not the land, because there was no trees. There was the big ice killed everything. But as the world needed most, the trees stood again. Now we're going to have fire from the land. And then the other one was that, and it took me 40 years to bring back the sacred fire, 40 years. But then the second one was that I had to build a healing center on Lookout Mountain of my family, my grandmother's family. So I'm building a center for healing because, like the rest of the North American Native community, because of the influx of the white people who stole their lands and killed the people and introduced the fire water, the Danish did the same thing to Greenland. And because Greenland was being developed by the Danes were not allowed to bring their women along. So the Danish government paid them 50 beers a weekend. So there was a lot of drinking going on. Of course, Native people come along and they drink the same, and then out of that were born many thousands of children fathered by the Danish men. Or the Danish people were really smart to say that man has no right to pay child support, or the child has no inheritance right from that father he has. So alcohol was really rampant in 1969. So my father and my mother instructed me that I should build a center for healing on that mountain. So that's what I'm doing. And actually, I'm leaving now to go home from Ottawa to Angaangaq to start working on it. So all the help I can get, I need. And if you have room in your heart, prayers would be very good. And if you come to visit me to help cleaning the land, you had to bring 1 kilo of coffee, because that would be drunk in one day. And I'm expecting, hopefully, 300 people will be coming for months to help clean the land so we can build the center of healing. Her name is Angaangaq Angakkorsuaq, grandmother's house, honoring our grandmother. And it's an amazing, amazing land. It's 33 kilometers from the airport. There are no other buildings around, but you will be looking out. Every unit of apartment will have sun from morning to night. So when you come, bring yourself in a sleeping bag and maybe a little tent. Although you can stay outside, it's summertime, so it's pretty warm. It only goes down to 0 at night. A sleeping bag will keep you warm. So it will be very good to have as many hands as possible. So I welcome everybody who wants to come. So if I don't see you downtown California, I expect to see you in Kalaallit. Oh.
Thank you.